1 in every 8 people in the world live with a mental disorder. That's according to the World Health Organization. In 2019, for instance, 40 million people had bipolar disorder. These people normally have depressive episodes followed by manic symptoms. What makes it even harder is the fact that in most societies, mental illness is not often spoken of. In this episode of Health Watch, we examine various explanations of bipolar disorder and the possible reason behind the increasing cases.
My name is Charity Muturi. I have lived experience with bipolar, which is a mental health condition. I served in the National Task Force on Mental Health and currently as a court petitioner to decriminalize suicide attempt.
The blues, suicidal thoughts, then suddenly limitless energy, drive, and bursts of creativity. Charity Muturi has bipolar disorder and is determined to change the stigma associated with mental illness.
I have been a patient at Mathare. I go through treatment, which is medication. I also do therapy at Mathare, and we have peer support groups. Yeah, because there's so much that a doctor can do, and then there's that when we come together, we share challenges, and someone says, I'm gaining weight because of this medication. I'll stop taking it, and someone says, no. Even me, I was called pregnant. I was called this. Give it a bit of time.
This has been the story of Charity Muturi. For 15 years, she struggled with something she had no knowledge of.
I would say, as a child growing up, I have a very loving family, but I had a very low self-esteem and thoughts of worthlessness. And as I got into a teenage and 14, they increased. And so I'd feel worthless and also feel suicidal. After that, I went into high school. I still had, a bit of mood issues, high, low. I also had many illnesses. I was always going to hospital for many things that only later did I realize were because of psychological issues. I went to college, I went to work, but I used to have these very hyper times when I was talking a lot, racing thoughts, many ideas, many projects that I'm not finishing, and also decisions that were not very good, relationally and financially.
This season, she says, would be followed by a low moment when she'd not want to do anything, not even leave her bed.
I did not want to open the curtain, I did not want to eat, I don't want to talk, I don't want to leave the house, a very low time. And so it took 15 years for me to get my diagnosis, because people were assuming, hivyo ndio Charity yuko, and sometimes they would see like this is attention seeking, or maybe I am just, that's just my character. And so in 2015, I had just lost my job, and I went again into a high, which I thought was just being busy. And then the low, I couldn't quite come back up. And so I was taken to a psychologist who explained to me that everyone has moods, You have low moods when something, sad happens, you have high moods. And sometimes it can be very high or low, but this is the general. And when you go above that, then it is called mania. Yeah, and if you go below that, it's called depression. So bipolar is high and low, mania and depression. So, but she explained to me that where I am, I need medication to be able to bring me up to the regular.
Charity cannot remember any trigger to her situation, but she assumes it must have been family related.
For me personally, I cannot remember. It must have happened. But I've not yet been able to see what it is. Maybe I was too young, I don't know. But generally, whether we look at gender-based violence or conflict in the country or post-election violence, that all of these things are relational at some point. And then there's also financial triggers. So I cannot pinpoint at that time, but later, later I had experiences that were difficult, trauma and so on, which I'm still working through.
Charity explains what she believes makes the treatment journey even harder is that in most societies, mental illness is not spoken of openly.
By then, I still had, cover from the work that had ended. And so I had, access to very high quality services, diagnosis, or rather due diligence diagnostics, like MRI, because sometimes the symptoms of bipolar can mimic symptoms of a brain disorder. And so after that, I started treatment, but I couldn't afford it after some time. So I was on and off medication until now I settled as a patient of Mathare. The stigma that affects us most, one is self-stigma, which now I was helped through because I had therapy throughout, at least at the beginning, and then my family is supportive. But I have walked many patients and caregivers through stigma. And if I could give one example, there is a group that my father was on. It's not even me, but he was in a group and he mentioned, in a story, my daughter was at Mathare, and before he finished explaining, he was removed from the group.
According to data from the World Health Organization, in 2019, 970 million people around the world were living with a mental disorder, and in 2020, the number of people living with anxiety and depressive disorders rose significantly because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mental health is currently a crisis. It's a phenomenon that has become too much in terms of conditions of mental health. And mental health basically refers to a person's psychological, emotional, and well-being. In essence, it influences what we feel, how we think, and behave. It is important to remember that a person's mental health can change over time, depending on many factors. Generally, the environment in which we live in plays a great role, or where we have been nurtured, great role in terms of our mental health status, how we behave, our personality. So depending on the factors, for example, when demands are placed on you more than what you are able to produce or achieve, then your mental health status will be impaired. That pressure will definitely have effect on your mental health status. For example, the latest phenomenon like climate change. We understood very well that climate change has come with a huge burden. It has come with a lot of pressure and stress, generating quite a number of stress. Eventually, people are not able to meet the demand of their life, or they are not able to fulfill what they intended to fulfill. Eventually, they end up in stress, and the stress gradually moves into depression, and you will find quite a number of people getting depressed.
Charity is all too aware of this. For some time now, she has been at the front line in raising awareness about mental health.
I looked at my journey and I wished someone had told me earlier. And so I started the journey of advocacy. So we have peer support groups where, as people living with and as caregivers, we discuss, our challenges with medication, but also life. Our challenges with education and employment, because my illness has affected education and employment for me. And then also family support. And after that now, even through the support groups, we are able to do advocacy. Apart from advocacy, we have started saying as patients, we are the ones who know what ails us most. And so we have been speaking with the Ministry of Health, who've been very positive, and they've begun to include us in policies. So we tell the doctor, therapy is not 500, it is 500 plus my fare, plus the lunch I'll need, plus the day I have to come back, and so on.
People should look out for the following as possible signs of a mental health disorder. Withdrawing from friends, family, and colleagues. If you have been a social person and you have been relating to people, and then all of a sudden, gradually you start withdrawing from your family members, your friends, or colleagues, then there is an issue. So that's a sign of mental health. Secondly, avoiding activities they will normally be enjoying. For example, someone just delinking himself from activities that he has been always known for, and he used to do it, working very well. You will find sleeping too much or eating sleeping less is also a sign of a sign that we need to watch on. And once you see that, just know that you need attention. Eating too much or too little, or feeling hopeless, having consistently low energy, or using mood altering substances, such as someone who earlier on used to just live on a normal life, and then he goes into alcohol drinking, he goes into drug usage. There's a problem that perhaps that is emanating, and that is a sign of mental health disorder.
Experts say that although most people are resilient, people who are exposed to adverse circumstances, including poverty, violence, disability, and inequality, stand a higher risk.
The diagnosis of mental health relates to how those symptoms appear. Now, first and foremost, you must do a physical examination of your client or your patient. Simply, you want to know exactly whether these symptoms that you see now are related to mental health, or they are related to any other conditions that would have been easily manageable under medical condition. So basically, you must do a physical examination of your patient. Secondly, you will do some laboratory tests to rule out some conditions that create similar symptoms when they appear. For example, if you have thyroid functions, you got thyrotoxicosis, you'll have anxiety, you'll have all signs or symptoms that a person with mental health will appear with, but it's because of the toxicity of the thyroid. Yeah. So you need to rule out that as well. Then thirdly, which is the main one for mental health, is of course psychological evaluation. And of course in mental health, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors patterns will be assessed. And generally, there's what is called DSM-5, that is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
The journey of medicine is not easy. We need families to be understanding. We need families to work with the patient, because it's a new journey for us. It's a new journey for the family. We have families that say, amekataa kukunywa dawa. Take time, ask, without judgment, listen without judgment, and find these solutions together. For most patients and caregivers, because this, illness affects the whole family. And so, like when I was diagnosed, there was very little information from Kenya. That was in 2015. And so most of the resources I was getting or things I was reading were from the UK or the US. And mental illness is a scientific issue, so it's the same, but it affects us differently based on where we are coming from.
With the gap between the need for treatment and its provision remaining very wide all over the world, and is often poor in quality when delivered, majority continue to suffer in silence.
Many mental health patients in Kenya struggle to find the highest attainable standard of health, as our constitution talks about. And so we have services here that are very high in cost, and we have services here, the Madare and also other therapy services that I'll be talking about. But we don't have them at mission hospitals and so on. So access to treatment, and most of the information you'll get even online, is from facilities that are too expensive for most people, because mental illness is a chronic illness. It is a non-communicable disease managed chronically, so it needs to be sustainable in cost.
I think leadership of this country, technocrats, and all other fraternities that are able to reach the community must speak out on issues related to mental health, so that we are able to improve the lifestyle, the productivity of our people, and of course the few who are mentally challenged, or those who are mentally challenged, they are able to live a successful life like any other person. And actually, mental health is not a sentence. It is actually part of conditions that are treatable, and people shouldn't be shying away from seeking therapy and medication.
Purity Musenzuki, KTN News.